In these videos, I talk about movies I like, and in the best ones, we're really talking about people. What motivates us, what challenges we face, and what triumphs we can accomplish. This is one of the reasons forms of the hero's journey have remained so popular for so long. When we look at ourselves and our history on this planet, one concept can be found at the center of every conflict, every accomplishment, in times of terrible war and illusionary peace. Power. How do we define it? How do we wield it? What consequences do we face when power is contested? There's a movie that gives us a very good glimpse into the analysis of power. Also, it goes without saying that this is one of my favorite movies of all time. Today we're going to talk about 1987's The Untouchables.
Do you know what a blood oath is, Mr. Ness?
Yes.
Good, because you just took one.
The Untouchables, directed by Brian De Palma, is a story about a time in the early 20th century when the US decided to ban alcohol through the 18th Amendment to the Constitution. Now, I hope you're sitting down, because this might be a bit of a shock. People like to drink. I know, shocking. There may have been a few organizations that realized they could make some extra money sneaking booze from places that had it, like Canada, to places that needed it, let's say Chicago. These criminal organizations would suddenly have a new and powerful source of income. Being good entrepreneurs, investments were made to protect their, let's call them organized crime operations. The Untouchables is about one of the biggest conflicts between the forces of the government, who wanted the US to be without the juice of sin, and a small business owner named Al Capone. Just kidding, Al Capone was a monster, but an interesting one. By the way, if you want an excellent breakdown of Al Capone's life and can understand the heaviest Scottish accent this side of Shrek, check out Count Dankula's video. He has done him as one of his mad lads. The link is in the description. This review is not meant to be historically accurate, because the movie's not. I'm focusing primarily on the contents of the movie, but there will be some parts that I have to reference real-life events. I feel that illustrating a wider context is important to understanding why I think The Untouchables is a fantastic movie. And let's be honest, power is almost always an interesting topic to discuss, especially when a movie demonstrates the subject so well. In 1959, two social psychologists, John R.P. French and Bertram Raven, identified 5 types of power that I think fits into today's look at The Untouchables: coercive, reward, legitimate, expert, and referent. The trouble with defining power is we usually look at it from the perspective of legitimacy. At times, we incorrectly assume that a legitimate form of power, such as the government, could not be coercive or use questionable tactics to reach their goals. Sometimes, it's also assumed that illegitimate power, such as crime organizations, could never become legitimate. Well, that second one's probably true. The reason we have difficulty understanding this conflict is, and I'm no psychologist, that power is really a weapon. In the right hands, it could be a force for good. In the wrong hands, well, you know what happens then. The Untouchables follows this logic beautifully and shows us one group of protagonists clinging on to legitimate and expert power. Al Capone's power does not originate from the government, so he has to rely on coercion, bribes, and violence to exert his power. In a shock to no one, he's able to use or spend his illegitimate power, namely bribes, and create legitimate power through judges, police officers, and other members of the legitimate system of governance. Where The Untouchables succeeds is showing how powerful Capone becomes by really purchasing legitimate power, while Eliot Ness and his team occasionally find a benefit to using a little coercion, a few threats, and a little violence to get their job done. The most memorable scene in the movie sets up this blurring of lines between the tactics Ness uses versus what Capone is obviously willing to use. Sean Connery plays Jim Malone, a veteran beat cop that Eliot Ness encounters by accident, but turns out to be a pivotal point in the movie.
You said you wanted to know how to get Capone. Do you really want to get him? You see what I'm saying? What are you prepared to do?
Everything within the law.
And then what are you prepared to do?
Malone serves as the wise mentor to Kevin Costner's Elliot Ness, but his wisdom is one of bluntness, brutality, and knowledge of how the underside of Chicago works.
Want to get Capone? Here's how you get him. He pulls a knife, you pull a gun. He sends one of yours to the hospital, you send one of his to the morgue. That's the Chicago way. And that's how you get Capone.
The theme and really the plot of The Untouchables plays around this scene. Previous to this pep talk, Ness naively thought that using only legitimate power, the power of the police badge, would be enough to topple Capone, who was really an expert in nearly all the forms of power. It's only after this scene in the church that Ness really becomes a threat, which amps up the war between himself and Capone. Malone convinces Ness that legitimate power is not enough to take down Capone. He's got to get his hands dirty to get the job done. Ultimately, Ness plays a combination of different power structures to corner Capone and trap him in the one truly level playing field, the courtroom. Of course, Capone does not realize this because he owns every courtroom in Chicago. But Ness has the power of the state, while Capone has essentially bribed every judge and threatened every jury. On its face, and to Capone himself, Capone has the advantage. But in the end, Ness, having a better understanding of how to wield legitimate power, is able to end Capone's reign using the same forms of power that elevated Capone to essentially be the king of Chicago. Again, these are events that happened in the movie and not necessarily how it actually happened. Unfortunately, the events of the Untouchables movie were mostly fictionalized or blending of events to make for one hell of a story. Paramount Pictures made this movie because they held the filming rights to Elliot Ness's autobiography called The Untouchables, which they used to produce the 1959 television series of the same name. Originally, Paramount Pictures wanted to make The Untouchables 1987 movie a big screen adaptation of the television series. However, director Brian De Palma, producer Art Linson, and screenwriter David Mamet all felt that they didn't want to adapt the series, so they took their own dramatic license with the story and the true events that inspired it in order to make what they felt would be a good big screen epic. This made for a better movie, but it further split the real events from what happens in the movie. For example, the real-life Al Capone knew enough about governmental power to realize that killing a prohibition agent would cause significantly more trouble for his crime organization than he was willing to deal with. So, while Al Capone did repeatedly try to buy them off with bribes, never once in real life did he attempt to kill Elliot Ness or any of his men. As a matter of fact, despite the final dramatic courtroom scene in the movie, the real Al Capone and Elliot Ness never came face to face. One of the co-authors of the Untouchables novel, which the movie and TV series were based upon, took liberties with the character of Elliot Ness as well. The movie portrays Elliot Ness as being happily married, with a wife and a daughter and a baby son. In real life, Elliot Ness had been married 3 times, and the only child they ever had was an adopted son named Robert. Also, the movie Elliot Ness was portrayed almost as a shoot-'em-up action hero. In real life, Elliot Ness really disliked guns and often wore an empty holster on duty and never shot anyone in his entire career. Even some of Ness's crew were fictionalized or blurred together. The character of Oscar Wallace, played by Charles Martin Smith, was loosely based on Frank Wilson, the IRS agent who worked to indict Capone for income tax evasion. Wilson had been working on this project since 1928 and had next to nothing to do with Ness and the Untouchables in real life. Unlike the movie, Wilson was not killed by Capone, though Capone reportedly placed a contract on his life, which was never carried out. And speaking of Capone, Robert De Niro's performance as Al Capone is really the gold standard for mafia and crime movies forever. He can be charming and entertaining, and very quickly turn into menacing and haunting in an instant. And we can't really talk about a movie Robert De Niro is in without some trivia about his bizarre method acting techniques. De Niro tracked down Al Capone's original tailors and had them make some identical clothing for the movie, and even went as far as insisting on wearing the same type of silk underwear that Al Capone wore, even though it would never be seen on camera. And even though I know he tried, De Niro didn't have enough time to gain the extra weight needed for the role, so he had to wear pads and pillows for the desired effect of looking like the chunkier Capone. In The Untouchables, there's a scene where Capone is attending a theatrical performance of Pagliacci. While Capone watches the finale of the play, he is visibly overcome with emotion, which speaks to the power of the performance he is watching. During the performance, he's informed that his hit on Jim Malone, played by Sean Connery, has gone through. Capone's expression immediately switches from one of despair to one of joy, still with tears streaming down his face. It's haunting. At that moment, the aria being performed is the famous Vesti la Gioba, put on your costume, which further reflects Capone's public image, contrasting with his violent side. This is the play that really built the mythos of the sad, vengeful clown, and I think it's used perfectly here in The Untouchables. Pagliacci is a story of love, loss, betrayal, and revenge. In the story, Netta is cheating on her husband by having an affair with one of the actors in their comedy troupe. At the same time, yet a third member of their group, Tonio, falls in love with Netta, leading to essentially all of the men, including her husband Canio, coming into conflict with each other. Tonio, not being Netta's lover or husband, tells Canio, her husband, about the whole love triangle. In the end, and during one of their performances, Canio confronts and murders Netta. He then turns the knife on Silvio, Netta's lover. The audience, unaware that this is not part of the performance, loves this drama playing out on stage and gives it rousing applause. Canio, covered in his wife's blood, yells at the audience the comedy has ended, making them aware that what they just witnessed was not part of the act, and thus ends the tragedy of Pagliacci. Pagliacci fits so well into The Untouchables because of the mirror it holds to the drama playing out in the streets of Chicago. Netta, in the play, is the prize that everybody seeks. In Chicago, it's power. Both are lusted after. Both drive men to kill. And in the end, in both cases, the violence that Capone and Canio use to get what they want ultimately causes them to lose everything. Unfortunately, The Untouchables in real life did not have the happy ending that the movie portrayed. Eliot Ness and his role in bringing down Capone was almost completely forgotten by the time of his death in 1957. No Chicago newspaper carried the news of his passing. It was only because of the publication of the Untouchables book and the 1959 television series that we're aware of Ness today. Eliot Ness, by some reports, became quite a fan of alcohol and passed away at a quite young age of 54. And even though Capone tried to bribe him several times, Ness died almost broke. That scene in the Untouchables movie with the alderman and the envelope seems to be one of those rare scenes based on actual fact. In reality, according to Ness, there was $2,000 in that envelope. Capone promised that every Monday, a similar envelope would appear on his desk if Ness ignored the bootlegging operations under Capone's crime syndicate. $2,000 in those days is worth almost $30,000 in today's money. But in the movie and in reality, Ness refused the bribe, and in later years, he struggled with money. He died almost broke at the age of 54. For all the struggle and all the violence and all the battles over power, what happened? The prohibition on alcohol was quickly repealed, thankfully. Al Capone ended up serving a long sentence in prison and eventually living with dementia and dying essentially in a vegetative state. Eliot Ness may have ended up a literary hero, but died relatively young and nearly destitute. Reality teaches us that the creepy alderman was correct. No one is untouchable. As for a movie, though, The Untouchables is a fantastic, if not fictional, retelling of that story. It's a story of power versus authority, good versus evil. It's also a story about how wisdom and experience can be valuable life lessons, which leads me to a scene that stuck with me and I think serves as a metaphor for The Untouchables and all the struggles of that time period.
What is that?
What is that?
Yes, yes, sir.
Got him with the heathen. That is my call box key. And that is St. Jude.
Santo Jude. He's a patron saint of the lost causes.
And policeman.
The patron saint of police officers is actually Michael, the Archangel. He's also the saint of first responders and the military. All the way back in the medieval times and leading all the way up to today, St. Michael's blessing has not only served as a form of protection, but also as a sign that the fight before us is one that is just, blessed from on high, and we're on the side that is right and virtuous. Jim Malone, Sean Connery's character, carries the medal of St. Jude. And even though Connery's Scottish, Malone was, I think, meant to be an Irish police officer. Irish police officers often carried St. Jude medals. St. Jude is the patron saint of hopeless causes. I'm slowly going through my list of movies that I love and want to share with you. What movies stand out as one of your favorites? Comment below with your feedback about this video, and as well as what movies you love. Also, I'm very thankful for all the views, comments, subscriptions. I appreciate your support and encouragement. Thank you for watching.